talk is what we use when we're waiting for something, all right? When we don't know what to talk about, when there's something called an awkward silence. Do you guys know what an awkward silence is? Awkward silence is when there is no sound, nobody speaking. It's a very uncomfortable moment, okay? We call this awkward. I'll put it in the chat for you. We say awkward silence, okay? I have to deal with awkward silence a lot, all right? Someone says here, in the elevator, yeah. There can be awkward silence. Maybe in the elevator you don't want to talk, that's fine. But sometimes in business cases, you might want to talk. You know, you have a meeting with people. Even it might be a video call. There might be several of you connected from different places, and you're waiting for the chairman of the meeting, the chair of the meeting to show up. And so you're just talking about things. They could be professional or not, all right? So I'm going to give you guys some tips on that today, okay? So I'm going to give you guys some common phrases that you can use for any conversation that you might have with somebody, all right? I'm going to give you some tips for using in conversations, all right? And I'm going to, give you the tools to ask the right questions, all right? And to ask them correctly. Because we can have problems when we ask questions. And this can be for many, many reasons. You know, our listeners might be shy, okay? You guys sometimes are shy. Until I get you guys warmed up, then you start talking a bit more. But you guys are typically shy in the beginning, and then you start participating and talking, okay? And there might be reasons for that. I'm not asking the right questions, okay? So that's a possibility. I might not be asking the right questions, and so you guys are shy, and you're not speaking back to me, or you're not chatting back to me, okay? So what do you guys, before we go on to the next part, how would you start a conversation? How do you start a conversation in English? Can anybody tell me in the chat, how would you start a conversation? Any participants? Ah, good. Good, all right. It's Charo, right? Or do you prefer Rosario? Okay, Charo. How would you start? You could say hi to start a conversation, but what questions would you ask? What questions would you ask somebody if you're starting a conversation? Hey, assuming you know these people, yeah, you can say, how are you? All right, you can say, how are you? But we have other ways to say things, all right? You say, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, yeah. All right, these are nice and formal. If you haven't met the person before, you can say, nice to meet you. But I want to give you guys some more natural sounding things today, okay? You guys know those. You know these typical conversation starters that you've seen in textbooks all of your lives. These are very formal. If you're talking to colleagues that are international, you don't have to be so formal, okay? You can say good morning, you can say hello, all of these things. But what about what's up? Okay, if you need to introduce yourself today, since in other webinars we've talked about proper introductions, I'll go over it a little bit, but normally introducing yourself, you tell them who you are unless you've already been introduced beforehand. I'll refresh you guys a little bit on a previous webinar. Remember, if you have been, if we're all standing around and say, oh, hey, I'd like to introduce you to Michael. And if I say, oh, hi, my name is Michael, it's not necessary to say your name again. If I say, this is Michael, I don't need to say, or if I say, hey, I'd like to introduce you to Charo, all right? Charo is one of the participants today. Charo doesn't need to say, hi, I'm Charo. No, we know that already. So don't repeat your name if someone gives your name. That's something important. But when you introduce yourself briefly, you just say kind of what you do and what area you work in. You say, I'm responsible for something. Remember, guys, it's always responsible for, all right? So this is the perfect introduction. So we'll keep the introduction aside because we did that in another webinar, okay? I didn't change my background today, by the way. I kept the same one. Next week, I'll change the background, okay? It's good for conversation, especially with small talk. But I used it for small talk last week already. So today we're using different things for small talk. Okay. Have you guys heard the term what's up before? Not WhatsApp, but what's up. If I ask you all right now, if I say, hey, what's up? How do you answer that question? How do you answer if someone says, what's up? Can anybody give me an answer there? Charo says, I'm fine, I'm fine. Says Angel as well. Actually, this is something that we wouldn't say I'm fine to, okay? This is one of those strange things. It's like in Spanish when someone, this happened to me as well. When I came to Spain and someone would say, hey, ¿qué hay? And I didn't know how to answer because, you know, if you're saying, it's like saying, what's there, you know? What's there? And I hear this and so I say, how do I answer? Do I say I'm fine? Do I say, sí, todo bien, estoy bien? It's kind of really strange. You don't know how to answer it. What's up is the same way. We wouldn't say, I'm fine. Don't ever say, someone says, what's up? You don't say, I'm fine. How are you? No, it's not exactly that. It's kind of a way to say hello, basically. So you can say, one of the most typical things to say is not much. You, what's up is not really a good way to start a conversation, okay? It's a good way to say hello, but it kind of finishes. So what we need to look at are other things to say, okay? So instead of saying hello or how are you, which are the typical things, you can say, hey, what's up? But what about saying, how's it going? How have you been? If we say, how have you been? We're taking something into the past, all right? So if I say, how have you been? We're talking about lately, you know? How have you been? Since the last time that we saw each other, how have you been? Are things getting better? Are things getting worse? Et cetera, et cetera. It allows the person to talk and elaborate more. How's it going is basically, yeah, fine, all right? But how have you been? All of these things are to say fine, all right? So these are all things to really say hello with, but they're not going to generate usually a lot of comments. How often, this is a question for you guys, how often do you say, I'm not doing very well today? When someone asks you, how's it going? Or how have you been, or whatever, do you normally say, yeah, great, everything's fine? Are we positive, or do we honestly say that we're not doing well if we're not doing well? What do you guys do in this case? Always positive, John. Yes, even if you're not, because I have a feeling that sometimes I tell people, I'm not feeling well today, or oh, I'm really tired. I'm quite honest. I'm really honest. When someone says, how's it going, or how are you? I say how I'm doing in that moment. I don't, you know, and so sometimes if you're honest, this generates more conversation, okay? So just an observation for you guys. It's fine to say how you're feeling. Someone's asking you, so reply. You don't have to lie without getting too personal. Maybe there's something that you don't want to say, so don't worry, you know, if you don't want to be too personal, don't say how you're feeling. You can lie, but I think it's perfectly fine if you know the people to say, oh yeah, I'm a bit tired this morning, or oh, I've got a lot of work. I've got a lot of work lately. You know, I've been doing a lot of work. Okay, these are perfectly fine. What's new? What's new is another way to say how, you know, how are you? What's new? And this is kind of creative. It's kind of what's new. What things are different since the last time that I saw you? Okay, what's new? How are you doing? You know this, okay? And I really like this one. This last one. It's very, very colloquial, but it sounds nice, and you can use it in a business case, in a business situation as well. You can say, how's life treating you? Okay. Oh, yeah, things are going well. Yeah. Well, not too bad. You can say things are going well or not too bad. All right. Okay. So this is just kind of the beginning. All right. But what do you start talking about? What do you talk about? If you are, if you really want the conversation to keep going, which is important, you have to be creative. You have to think of, what can I talk about, and is it appropriate, you know? So you obviously know if you're talking to people that are maybe your bosses or people that you don't know very much, you have to keep it in an area that's comfortable and not too invasive, okay? So there's an acronym that I like, which is called FORD, all right? And depending on who you're talking to, you can use it, all right? So FORD, literally in this case, means family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. But this is not showing my entire slide. Okay, no worries. So it's family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. Okay, I'll write it in the chat because it's not showing up on the screen, okay? Unfortunately. Okay. What does recreation mean in English? If I said to talk about recreation, what could that be? What could that mean? Anybody? I think you guys came to the right one. You're very shy today, all of you. Recreation is kind of your, very good. Thank you, Angel. It's your hobbies, okay? So recreation is your hobbies. And it's good to talk about your dreams. I think it's really nice to talk about something different because we always have the same conversations. You guys are used to the same conversations. It will help your English if you do something different. If you ask a question that's not a typical question, you know, and it will also surprise in a good way, usually, if you're careful, the person who is listening, all right? The person you are having a conversation with, okay? So you can ask about family. If you know, you might say, oh, do you have any kids? If you don't think this is going to be offensive, usually it's not offensive. Do you have any kids or where's your family from? Okay. So that depends on the audience. And I think you guys know how to gauge that. You know how to see what you can talk about what you can talk to certain people about. Okay. But if you have a good relationship, there's no problem in saying, you know, do you have any kids or, you know, how long have you lived in the area, things like that. Okay. Family, I usually don't talk about, but I might talk about my childhood with my family. Okay. In the past instead of now. I don't have kids, so for me it's, you know, kind of strange, but I do have nieces. Okay. So a lot of times I talk about my nieces personally. I talk about them. I bring them into the conversation instead of asking about them. You know, you might say, or you might even ask, how many brothers and sisters do you have? Okay. And get them talking that way. Okay. Talking about their work, their occupation. You can ask, what do you do for a living? In this case, you're going to know because they're people you work with. But I think it's interesting to kind of talk about what they do. So what things do you have to do on a normal day in your job? What are your responsibilities, you could say, or what? I think the best way to do this is say, what do you do on a normal day? This gets somebody really talking a lot, okay? Recreation. You can say, what do you do in your spare time? Which means free time, okay? What do you do in your spare time? All right, I'm putting it in the chat, by the way. What do you do in your spare time? Okay. Oh, I see that one of those messages I only sent in private. I'm sorry. There we go. Okay. What do you do in your spare time? Gets them talking. Do you have any hobbies or tell me something interesting you do. It doesn't have to be a question. You can just say, hey, tell me something interesting. Tell me something interesting about yourself. Okay. And dreams is really interesting because I think us as human beings, I think we all have dreams. We have things that we want to do. We have things to look forward to in the future. And so you might, you know, start talking about dreams. I'm going to give you guys some tips in a little bit because we're going to look at some grammar, okay, that I think is interesting to review, to talk about somebody's dreams, all right? To talk about what they are going to be doing in the future, what you think that they should, you know, what they think they would like to be doing, or this is almost like a job interview as well sometimes if you think about it. But you can say, where do you expect to be, or what would you like to be doing 10 years from now, okay? These are things when you talk about someone's dreams. So remember this. These are typical conversation areas: family, occupation, recreation, and dreams, all right? And this is where the dreams comes in because I want to look at the conditionals with you guys, okay? How many of you know how to form the conditionals? You've studied the conditionals, right? Have you studied the conditionals? More or less. I know people don't like the conditionals. I think you're afraid of them, okay? But they're very good for conversation. And they're very good for small talk. They're very good getting people talking and, you know, and getting the mood set, you know. I think this is something good that you guys should all remember, the conditionals. The first conditional is it's much more simple and it's not as good for conversation. But the second conditional especially is really good for conversation, okay? So that's when we take something, we talk about something that's not a reality at the moment, okay? It's very hypothetical, all right? Remember that's hypothetical, so it's very good for asking questions. You form it with the past simple after if, okay? So you have if I, okay, were, I could say in the past, all right? If I were a millionaire, all right? I would buy an island for myself. That would be great to have my own island. That would be kind of cool. So if I were this, I would buy an island, okay? But I'm asking a question normally, okay? So you ask somebody, if you had the possibility to work anywhere in the world, where would you work? I want you guys to answer me. Can anybody give me an answer to this question? Today, you need to be very participative because this is a small talk class. So even if you want to just do it in the chat, be participative, okay? So if you had the possibility to work anywhere in the world, where would you work? Maybe you have to think about it for a while, all right? In Australia, I see Canada, okay? Angel, can you put that in a complete sentence for me? If you feel like it. Normally we would just answer, yeah, Australia, Canada. You say, yeah, if I could, I would work in Canada. And then you would say, because, you know, someone might ask you, why have you chosen Canada, okay? So the good thing about this is it gets people talking. It's like, oh, well, I've chosen Canada because I think that there's a variety of things to do. I think it's cold there, but I could speak English. There are a lot of mountains. I love mountain sports. That's why I want to live in Canada, for example, okay? So I only have 2 people participating. Only 2 people would live somewhere else. Yeah, I would work in Canada if I could. Good, very good, Angel. Yes, I would work in Canada if I could because I love their way, very good, of life, all right? Charo would go to Australia with Maria, all right. None of you guys would go to Missouri, where I'm from? All right, no worries. Good. So, well, nobody else is answering. I got 3 participants at least. I hope by the end of today's webinar, I have everybody participating. Next question. If you were famous, what would you be famous for? This is something interesting you could ask somebody. Of course, I'll invite you all to my farm in the States, or my parents' farm. You can see the cows and all of that. You have a relaxing week on the farm, all right? If you were famous, what would you be famous for? Did you say, Jaro, did you say for doing nothing? That would be cool to be. I think some people become famous for doing nothing. They're just lucky. They become famous. Something happens to them and they become famous. I think a lot of people are famous and they've done nothing, okay? So yeah, if you, so for example, for me, I think if I were famous, I think it would be probably, I think it would be, I would like to be famous for doing something in the world, you know, to change the world, to make things better, you know? Kind of like Soli says here, if I were famous, I would say, if I were famous, I'd like to be famous for doing social projects. I like that. I like the way you're thinking. Very good. All right, and I'm getting more and more participants. Now, I want you guys to think of another question for me using the second conditional. This wasn't going to be easy, all right? So the thing is here, I want you guys to be creative because this is part of being able to have conversations, is to be able to really interact and be able to ask different things. And I think the second conditional is perfect for that. So what else could you say? What other type of question could you ask using the second conditional? Do I have any volunteers to write a question in the chat that we could use? I'll give you a minute to think about something. I think you have many ideas of what you could say. Are you guys thinking about them, or you have no idea? One of the typical ones is, if you were a billionaire, for example, what would you do? Very good. Yes, very good, Charo. Yeah, that's a typical one. If you were rich, what would you do? All right. If you could have, we always talk about these things that are dreams. This is the dreams part, okay? If you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live? If you had the option to choose between having a very small house anywhere you wanted in the world, or a very big house where you currently live, what would you choose? You can make them very complicated, okay? You can make very complex questions out of these. But this is something I want to encourage you guys to use, are the conditionals, okay? Nuria is going to be an actress. Nuria would be an actress if she was famous, all right? Okay, good. Now, looking at the third conditional, all right? And Maria would be a dancer. All right, we're full of like famous people, social people that are going to do a lot of good in the world, really good actresses and good dancers. That's fantastic. All right. I also like to use the third conditional when I ask questions. And these are really strange questions, okay, usually. But it's kind of a good way to take a conversation to the next level, depending on who you're talking with, okay? So if you really want to stick out, even if you're at a networking event, all right, if you're meeting new people, it's kind of good to break away and talk about things that are different, okay? So for example, with the third conditional, we're talking about something in the past that didn't happen, and if it did happen in the past, what would it have been like, okay? So this is a bit more complex. I'm just going to ask one question here. We're not going to focus a lot of time on it, okay? But if you had, okay, we're using the past participle here, the past perfect with the participle. If you had the opportunity to study something different, what would you have studied? What do you think you would have studied? I think I would have studied like maybe architecture. If I had the opportunity to study something different, I probably would have studied architecture, I think, or engineering. Even something really, really scientific, maybe like astrophysics or something. That would be kind of cool. What would you have studied? Can you guys tell me what you would have studied if you had had the opportunity to study something different? Or if you could, we could even change it. If you could go back in time and study, we can mix the conditionals. We can say, if you go back in time to study something different, what would you have studied? All right. You see, I'm finally getting everybody to participate, which is fantastic. I finally have most participants giving me answers. And this is the importance of small talk. So little by little, I'm getting you all to participate. Jose would have studied philosophy. I think philosophy is the base of a lot of things, yeah? Charo would have done history and art history, which is, I think, really interesting as well. History is a very important thing to study. And Soli would have studied music, yeah. I think it's important to study the things we like, right? I think that's something important, right? And I put another question here just for fun, which is, if you had been born in a parallel universe, what would you have done differently, okay? So you can get people to really start talking a lot with these questions. And that's what I want to show you guys, to think of questions, think of ways. And it's even, I think, important if you guys can take a pen and just write things down and have like a little cheat sheet. Do you know what a cheat sheet is? A cheat sheet is a chuleta, like one of these little chuletillas. And you might have a little cheat sheet where you put interesting questions down. I think it's something good for you guys to put some interesting questions that you might want to ask. And this could even be at a party. Have any of you ever been to a party where nobody is talking? Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. How do you say, we call it a cheat sheet. We would usually use it for an exam. What happened here? For some reason, it's not sending to everybody. A cheat sheet. Okay, usually for an exam, but even if you have, I'm sure you've all been to, if you've all been to like some of these parties where the party's not very fun, and then somebody arrives at the party and they start asking these questions and things just get really fun. It's really important. Anybody can be the life of a party if you ask the right questions, all right? And that's the important thing. So if you're asking a lot of questions, which I'm going to go to next, really important, okay, to keep a conversation going, to keep the life going in a party. Let's think of everything as a party, okay? It's very important to ask open-ended questions, okay? It's important to be a good listener, always. Listening is the foundation of a lot of things. And I think, again, to have your cheat sheet. Remember to write some things down, questions that you think, I'm going to ask that the next time I'm at a party, or I'm at a networking event, or I'm in a meeting, or waiting for people in English, and I need something interesting to ask, okay? So we have the typical closed questions. And I've had a lot of experiences with this in my life, okay? Myself, when I've had students who don't talk, when I've had a conversation class and the students aren't talking, sometimes it's really difficult. And I realized many times I was asking things that are closed questions. What do I mean by closed questions? You have very few options to answer, and the answers are very short, okay? So if I say, how was your day? You're gonna say, yeah, it's okay, it's fine, it was fine, all right? It's a question that the answer finishes right away, all right? And you need to keep going. The same as, where are you from? Okay, you can ask these questions, of course, but you need to know how to continue, okay? And I'm gonna give you some other options instead. Where are you from? Okay, I'll say, I'm from Missouri. But you might say, okay, well, I'm from Missouri, and then I'm waiting for someone to ask me another question. So I need you to ask another question to keep me going, all right? So you might say, what is interesting about your town or your city or your neighborhood, okay? So you know I'm from Missouri, but you could ask me, what is interesting about it, okay? And I can really start thinking about things, okay? Sorry to see you leave, Jose. If you want to come back, we have another session on Thursday if you want to join again on Thursday, okay? And you can participate with us. Thank you very much. Yes? All right. So thank you for your attendance. This is a way that you can make things keep going, all right? You ask someone, what do you do? You know, what do you do? What is your job, okay? Like I said in the beginning, all right, they give you the answer. Yes, I'm an English teacher. Or I'm a director of studies, okay? But you want to keep that conversation going, so you need to ask open questions. So you say, what things do you have to do on a normal work day, all right? What things do you do, all right? Another closed question that people typically ask is a very typical question. Well, how was your weekend? I can say, if you ask a question with how, you already know that it's a very closed question. It was fine, all right? Another typical closed question and that you should avoid is any question where you need to use do. So do you like eating sushi? Do you like that new series on Netflix? The answers are yes or no. We want to avoid yes or no questions, all right? So we use what, all right? What did you do today? What is interesting about your town? What things do you have to do on a normal work day? Or what did you do last weekend, okay? So this is one of my big rules, and this is a mistake that I've made as well many times, all right? I've been talking and not known how to continue a conversation, all right? So what I needed were to ask more open questions, okay? And so this has happened to me many times, all right? I want you all to become social butterflies, all right? Do you know what a social butterfly is? Anybody? A social butterfly is somebody that is very social and it gets people talking, okay? Someone asked me, what will you do next weekend? Yeah, that's a good way to ask. So you were talking about next weekend. Even better, instead of what will you do, I would say, what are you going to do, okay? What are you going to do? It sounds more colloquial, okay? So you say, what are you going to do next weekend, all right? That really gets people talking. Instead of saying, or you could say, do you have any plans? But again, this is a yes or no question. So you say, do you have any plans? They can say yes. Then you have to say, well, what are your plans, or what are you going to do? Okay, so sometimes it's best to just go to the open questions directly, all right? And we can ask many other types of open questions. These are just comparisons between the closed and the open, okay? Again, and I mentioned this in a previous webinar, and if you weren't there, it's really important to let the people know that you're interested in what they're saying, okay? So these are ways that we can sound interested or surprised with what someone is saying, okay? Something as simple as, oh, really? And you could even make, you know, with your eyes, say, wow, really? Ah, that's amazing, okay? Wow, okay. Important to smile as well, okay? So if you're smiling, that's good. If you don't understand something, or you can show that you're understanding, you say, so you mean that, and you can say, so you mean that the way that this ended was this way and not that way? You're checking your understanding, okay? And you can say, that's interesting, all right? If you're surprised about something, again, instead of really, you can say, no way, all right? These are just little things to show that you're listening and the other person keeps talking, okay? It's just kind of being polite. You say, you're kidding. This is another thing, you're surprised, you're kidding, okay? And if you want to check understanding, again, if I understand correctly, this means that, and we've seen this in another. Yeah, kidding is like a joke. Someone just asked if kidding, what does that mean? It's joking, really. And we use this a lot. We would never, you could say you're joking, but we also say you're kidding. It's quite common to say you're kidding. It's kind of like, I can't believe it, you're kidding. Are you for real? Okay, so these are just little tiny things that you guys can use when you're speaking with somebody to show that you're listening. It's very important to show that you're listening. Okay, sometimes though, and you guys might be thinking this, you might say, okay, Michael, well, you're giving us a lot of information on this, but we need some more things. So let's keep moving along. Let's continue, all right? So sometimes we want to change the subject when we're listening. And this needs to be done in a polite way, all right? So if you want to change the subject, you need to be polite. You might be bored, or you might literally have to go, or you might be uncomfortable with what is being talked about, okay? So you have ways that you can interrupt. Obviously, you could say, I'm sorry, you know, and interrupt directly, okay? But what you need to say are things like, by the way, you know? So someone's talking about a subject and you say, by the way, that reminds me of, okay? So you can actually say, by the way, and that reminds me in the same sentence. You can say, by the way, that reminds me of last weekend when I went to the same shop, they had a sale on this item, okay? They had a sale on new TVs. And so I decided to buy a TV, but I wasn't sure, okay? So we can, and I'm just imagining a random conversation, okay? Excuse me. We can also say, speaking of, okay? So these are cues, these are things that remind you of something else that someone is saying and are good for changing the subject a bit. So someone is talking about the trade war in China, and you don't want to talk about the trade war in China. You want to talk about something less political, okay? You might say, speaking of China, I went to a nice Chinese restaurant last weekend. Have you guys been? It's near Plaza de España. Just keep going, okay? The same thing. If someone is talking about politics, you don't want to talk about politics. You say, speaking of the elections, before I forget, the day after the elections, I'm going to organize something for us all to meet and this and that. So you have to find a way, you have to think of ways, and maybe it's good if you know you're going to go to an event and you might have to change the subject to, again, have a cheat sheet of things that you want to say, all right? Again, changing the subject for a second. You can even be honest and say, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I was just thinking, or I just thought of something and I don't want to forget, you know? It's kind of saying that you don't want to forget something and to kind of subtly change the subject, all right? And a lot of times it's just not even changing the subject, it's bringing the attention to yourself, which is not a bad thing always, you know? If someone is dominating and talking a lot, this is something as a teacher I have to control. I have to control that my students are respecting each other and someone is not dominating. And in many conversations, there's someone who's dominating everything and doesn't allow other people to talk. And so maybe you need to dominate and say, if someone else is dominating, you need to interrupt and bring the attention towards yourself a little bit. So you say, that's funny, something similar happened to me, and you start telling your story, okay? These are just some other things that you can put in your cheat sheet, okay? I'll be preparing, again, for these things, I usually prepare a takeaway, which are the key things from the presentation, okay? And this will be available on the corporate hub, on the Aztecs corporate hub, okay? So if you guys forget some of these things, you'll be able to see them later, okay? All right, I need some water because I'm talking a lot today, especially because it's small talk. Okay, all right. The last thing before we finish here is sometimes we have to leave a conversation. We have to interrupt directly. Instead of changing the subject, we just want an exit from the conversation. Maybe it's way too uncomfortable, or we honestly have something else that we need to do, or maybe this has happened to me before where I've been in a meeting and the boss arrives and the meeting is starting and someone is still talking to me, and it's very disrespectful for the boss or whoever's chairing the meeting. And so you have to think of a way to kind of politely finish, okay? In a meeting, it's a bit more difficult. So you might, in a meeting, you could say, well, it's been great. Yeah, you'll have to tell me more about this later, okay? Because we need to focus on the meeting, for example. But if you're somewhere where you need to physically leave, not in a meeting, you can say, it's been great talking to you, but I have to leave, okay? Or I'm sorry to leave so quickly, but my partner is waiting outside or something, okay? You can also use the telephone, all right? You can say, oh, sorry, this is a bad excuse, and I'm kind of encouraging you guys to lie. But you can even say, oh, sorry, I'm getting a call. Oh, hey, and you just kind of walk away, You say, we'll catch up later, okay? So if you're saying we'll catch up later, you're basically saying that you're not leaving directly. You're saying, okay, we'll finish this at another time, okay? It sounds really nice to say, I'd love to hear more about it, but when we both have more time. So let's keep in touch, for example, all right? Let's keep in contact. Or you can push it to the other person's side and say, I know you have a crazy schedule, all right? So I'll let you get back to work. I'll let you get back to what you're doing. And it's a way for you to leave, but to show that the other person is quite busy as well, okay? These are just some suggestions. There are other ways you can do it, but it's always important to be polite. So it's been a pleasure, guys. Thank you very much for your participation. In the end, most of you were speaking, so that was fantastic. And I hope you use some of these small talk strategies that I told you, okay? So thanks, guys. Have a good rest of the week. Or if you want to come on Thursday, we'll see you on Thursday. All right, thank you. Bye.